This is Dylan Moore with IRETA TV, and this is going to be part 2 with Glen Morgan, who is still with us here in studio. And we wanted to talk about the political landscape for 2022 in Washington State, because there have been rumblings that things might look a little different this time. And I was, you got your finger on the pulse better than most people do, and I wanted to know if we can confirm or deny with any sort of probability what these rumblings are.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I appreciate you having me here. And, I've done a couple videos on my We the Govern channel, and I've written about this sometimes and frequently in the past in other election cycles. And everybody's talking about this red wave, right? So there's this red wave idea. And so whether you're an activist, a more conservative, liberty-oriented activist, or whether you're a Republican establishment person, you're generally accepting, and even the Democrats recognize, there's a red wave coming of some kind.
Right.
And historically in the past, sometimes when that happens, the red wave sweeps parts of the country and it leaves others alone. Sometimes in Washington State, we've been left behind on some of those waves. And it's my perspective right now, just in traveling around the state, especially in the King County, Pierce, and Snohomish County area, where we have roughly 50% of the voters live in this.
Yeah, that's Seattle and Seattle
area.
Yeah,
that whole Seattle in Seattle, Tacoma, kind of Everett area, right? That whole area is really kind of that's 50% of the voters roughly in there. And so when you look at, and it's 50% of the Republican voters, by the way. This is one thing that people oftentimes...
I didn't connect that. Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of times people look at it, my activist friends and other people family that I have in Eastern Washington, right? They'll say, well, what the heck, it's those King County voters. But the funny thing is, they're, at least judging from this last election cycle, there's actually more Republican voters in King County than all 20 counties in Eastern Washington combined. And but nobody pays attention to that because they still get, the number of Democrat voters are even larger, right?
Right, and they think, King County, that's totally Democrat. There's no point in even addressing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and I've done some analysis before in the past, just showing where conservative voters generally live, and it's kind of interesting. But we got this cycle that we're going through right now, and it's. The Republican consultants or the history people who've been paying attention to elections will always tell you, okay, well, whichever president's in office, that party usually loses lower ticket votes because there's always dissatisfaction with the president.
We can complain about the guy who's making the mistakes in office right now.
Yeah. And so there's truth to that analysis, right? That's historically true. You can go back 60, 70 years, pretty much with fairly regular, results. Whichever party's in power at the presidency will lose seats in the House, lower levels, including the State House. So there's some truth to that. So from that perspective, that looks good for Republicans in Washington State, just that alone. But in this cycle, what you have is an exceptionally unpopular president going into an exceptionally...
What are you talking about? I love Joe Biden.
Yeah, everyone does, right? Yeah. And our state did. They voted him, right? Or at least as many of the votes we could figure out. So the Democrats loved him, right? He was the second Messiah coming and saving them from Trump. And so what I think's happened is they built this guy up so much, and expectations were totally unrealistic for a guy with his mental capacity and obviously declining cognitive state of mind, and not exactly a guy putting together a stellar team of capable people.
And honestly, even if he was still with it, he's not that exciting.
No, exactly, exactly. But so you have a combination of things that are happening. So it's not just the fact that this guy's in the presidency and you're going to have, they're going to take a hit somewhere. It's that you have that guy and he's a disaster, right?
Everything has gone to hell from day one.
So inflation, crime, all these other things. And a lot of this is at a local level. And I when I'm talking about elections, I don't do a lot of talking about what happens in D.C. It's 3,000 miles away, right? I don't know what's going on back there, and there's a lot of other people that can talk about it. But when it comes to what happens in your local community, that has the biggest impact in your life, your day-to-day life. If North Korea decided to nuke Washington, D.C. tomorrow and everybody vanished, you'd still get up in the morning and you'd still go about your day-to-day routine for the most part, right? But if your police department locally collapses, you
got a problem.
You got an immediate problem at your front door, right? That you can't avoid. You've got out of control crime, maybe, or if your local fire department disappears tomorrow and there's a fire, you can't call 911. I mean, these are the kind of things that actually affect you. And there's no way to avoid it. Like, that's a real big impact. And local government, I think, has a much bigger impact in your day-to-day life than what happens in D.C.
And then to that, I just want to emphasize to that point, I think we really, really saw that when the COVID stuff started.
Absolutely.
And the governors were able to give the middle finger to Trump, and he couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you see, even in local jurisdictions like King County and Seattle decided to self-immolate, right? Let's just see if we can burn our city down as fast as possible, right? And give away a few blocks to chop, and let's see how that experiment works, and
and then have Jay Inslee come out and go, I have no idea what you're talking about. What's this insurrection group? I've never heard of it.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so regular people that aren't political junkies, people who don't pay attention to what's going on a day-to-day basis, they may not even affiliate with a party specifically. You call them this mysterious independence, whatever that is, but they're not looking around saying, wow, life is so much better now.
They're like,
right?
What the heck is this?
Right. And these are things that directly impact their lives. And so, and really what I'm talking about is crime, specifically, crime in particular.
Drugs, which is mixed in with that.
Mixed in with that. The homeless, drug addiction, in a regular developed world, you don't drive by tent cities and think, wow, that's great. What a huge advancement.
Or you walk through a park and you're dodging needles.
Or it's really dangerous. You can tell you can't bring your kids to the soccer game anymore because you got to sweep the field 3 or 4 times first with adults to make sure you remove all the needles out of the field. I mean, these are the things that affect people's lives. Or if you live in an apartment complex in Kent and somebody goes out and steals all your carburetors, or goes out and cuts the catalytic converters out of your car overnight, or they decide just for the heck of it to walk through and break all the windows in your cars.
Nobody does anything about it.
Nobody does anything about it. I've had friends that have had that experience in East Hill, Kent. So what happens is this sudden, and it's dramatic enough that it's not even that gradual. It's just a sudden impact. And so inflation's going up, the cost of all these different things are combining, I think, to create this perfect environment for people who are frustrated with those who are in charge, right? And really bad political decisions being made locally. Clearly self-evident locally. You've been complaining about that homeless camp. Nobody's doing anything to take it away. You've been, your kids have been at home for a year and a half, and you can tell that they can't do math, even at a fundamental basic level. What the heck's their school doing, focusing on, CRT training or whatever other drama? You're paying a lot of money for taxes, and where's it going? It seems like the more money you're giving, the worse it gets. This is the kind of thing that tends to percolate out into the electorate at a level that political insiders can't totally measure, where it's going at, but the people aren't happy. And the people who are in charge politically are the ones who suffer when the people are not happy at election time. I mean, those changes are going to come. And so I see a significant boiling kind of response that's occurring in the field. And out there in regular world, that I think these are ignored. These are people ignored by the political class generally, because they don't really who
cares what the cattle thinks?
Right, yeah. I mean, these are the peasants and the peons, right? We're out here seeing this, and the political class doesn't care. They want more grants. They want to focus on esoteric issues that don't affect the day-to-day lives.
They want to do the World Economic Forum directed stuff. Yeah.
They want to do censorship. They want to do grant grifting operations that are designed to not help anybody at all, but enrich the homeless industrial complex or the climate change alarmists, right? And so all this stuff's going on, and none of them care even a little bit about what's happening in these regular communities, places that really matter, these swing districts, like the 30th Ledge District where Federal Way is located, right? That's a classic district that's probably going to flip. The 47th Ledge District, which is kind of the East Hill, Kent, kind of Covington area. Again, another area that Republicans have not that long ago had people in office there. And the total balance of power in the state legislature, you're really looking at 8 seats to tie and 9 seats to change power. And at least...
Is that Senate and House?
No, it's just the House.
It's just the House.
Yeah,
okay.
just the House side. But the Senate's a lot fewer numbers, right? But the Senate only has half of them up for election in any given cycle. So you're looking at, a change of 5 in the Senate totally shifts the power to the Republicans, right?
Right.
And a change of 9 in the House does the same, where the Republicans, and that's not that far away, especially when you look at the math, where there's probably 16 vulnerable seats that the Democrats have in the House, and at least 6 in the Senate that are legitimately being contested, and the Republicans are running. It appears anyway they're running real races, and we haven't hit filing week yet. We don't
even know who's actually going to belly up to the
for
bar.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, anybody who's serious, I'm hoping, has already jumped in, because a lot of unserious people come out at the last minute, and usually last minute filings, you file late, lose early. That tends to be the profile, but. But this is a weird year. And one of the reasons why I think the Democrats can't see the significance of what's coming is that the voter profile changes that I'm seeing. The people who are deciding that they're going to vote differently now than they may have in the past, or they're going to participate now when they really didn't in the past.
Or maybe they're not even going to vote. They're like, frick it, I hate it all.
Right.
I was voting Democrat before, but I'm just fed up.
Could be, yeah. But I mean, I think there's more of a protest vote coming against them than they realize, and it's coming out of these immigrant-heavy communities, the Asian community, Hispanic community, a lot of these groups that I don't like to lump people by race, but the Democrats do. That's all they do. They obsess about it. And because of that obsessive racist sort of approach that they take to categorizing people, they believe that they're the party that speaks for minorities of all kinds, right? Because that's how they've tailored. That's the whole thing about intersectionality and this kind of idea of this critical race theory approach where everything's about race. And the truth is, when it comes to a lot of these issues, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to crime, when it comes to...
It doesn't care about your race.
It does not care about your race. And the people suffering the most are the ones the Democrats think automatically going to vote for them. And I don't think that's the case, but because of their ideology, they can't accept the fact that these people who have historically voted in a very high percentage form are not voting that way anymore. Especially, you're seeing a huge shift going the other direction.
Yeah.
And it's not that the Republicans are doing like something stellar and amazing and they're coming out of
right.
You know, they're not really
that great here in Washington. Yeah.
Well, they just aren't really providing a clear path
Yeah.
to why they should be in charge. And so, to some extent, that's a little bit of this kind of Stockholm syndrome, right? Or you've been a loser for so long, you don't know what it's like to be a winner.
Right.
And so that affects the political leadership sometimes, where they want to ride the wave, but they aren't out there making the wave happen, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a very different profile. Now, at the grassroots level, though, I think it's very different. And so what you're seeing is people are deciding, okay, I'm sure as heck not going to vote for this Democrat. And the Republicans are going to clearly get a lot of protest votes. You're going to get a lot of votes just simply saying, at least this person seems to recognize.
He said, I'll clean up needles. Vote.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's not trying. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of that attitude. They support the police. You know, we do surveys in Washington State. The police and firefighters are still the two most popular categories of public servants, those two. And so the Democrats just spent 2 years attacking, and especially the progressive, lefty kind of socialist world of Seattle and surroundings. They've spent this time attacking the police
and firing over the COVID stuff,
and firing or doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and then allowing this decay of social order to just break down all around them. That I think you can't hide from that. And so regular people are just looking at this saying that's crazy, right? And especially if you look at Washington State, Western Washington in particular, you have a pretty high percentage of Asian immigrants, right? Just it's always been true, right? It's for generations. My grandfather's class, when he graduated in 1936, right in Foster High School in Tukwila, you can see that about 25% of his class was Asian back then. It's always been that way. Sometimes it's a Japanese community. We're close to Asia. This is going to be one of the places where immigrants are going to come. A lot of Filipinos.
And Washington's relatively new. I mean, the Asians were already coming, but before Washington was even a state.
Right. So we have a high population, and they're our friends, our neighbors. There's a high rate of intermarriage, right? There's I have an uncle that's Japanese, right? So it's just we're all tied into this community. It is who we are in Western Washington in particular, and the Democrats have typically just presumed that they're going to be voting, that community by race is going to vote for them, and I don't see that happening now. Not like they think, and they're blinded to how that vote's going to come out.
Well, and then to that effect, they've grown lazy.
Oh yeah,
right?
very lazy
because they don't have to address an issue.
Right.
They just need to import voters, or they just need to cheat, or
bribe,
or bribe, or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, the show that we just did right before this one, we were talking about cleaning up the voter rolls.
Right.
Well, if there's a pinch on the voter rolls, and you might have some protest voting going on,
right,
that's a double whammy.
It is, and especially if they're not going to be there. It's not like these are people who are going to your meetings and chewing you out, right? So they don't know. I mean, I really think that this is genuinely a case where there's going to be a lot of political insiders that get blindsided by the vote, and that by default is probably going to benefit the Republicans and probably harm the Democrats, especially the more hardcore leftist Democrats, in my opinion. So the other thing is, if you go to a Democrat meeting today, and I send people to them periodically, right?
Just for fun, just to see.
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I've done it for years, right? And it's really not a functional environment. When you send people there,
Tell me.
they spend 20 minutes trying to sort out their pronouns, right?
Oh my God.
And they spend 30 minutes arguing about who misgendered who on Facebook or some posts in the past. The just absurd victimize. Everybody wants to be a victim because that's how you get ahead in the Democratic Party. And so on the bleeding edge of those who are aggressive activists, that's the kind of people that show up at their meetings. That's obnoxious. No normal person's going to go there and say, wow, this is such a productive use of my time. I'm so glad I'm here. They aren't going to do that.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you see that I think this was before the Trump election, or the 2020 election, Trump election. The Democratic Socialists of America meeting that they had, which was, it wasn't in Washington. It was
oh, right.
Yeah,
I kind of remember that.
Where everybody was just freaking out over pronouns. Like, nobody clap because people can get upset about clapping. You got to do this. And somebody came up and I got misgendered and I'm all upset.
Right.
That's all it was.
The first thing that we have to talk about is accessibility, and communicate with us if you need the mic held differently for you for any kind of reason. I see that no one's clapping for me. It could be because I'm not engaging, but it also is because everyone's doing this, and that's really important. Is there anybody here who's done abortion clinic escort work? Awesome. And additionally, with the noise issue, like avoid hissing, avoid waving banners, right? Because there's all sorts of things. Don't talk to cops because those loud bursts of noise, even though this is a noisy space, we can do something like reducing that. That's really important. So please don't clap, shoot up these. By all means, don't talk to cops if there are cops there for any reason at all, right? And if you do see someone talking to cops, let the marshals know. At space with anything that's like an aggressive scent, for instance, right? If you don't know what to do, show up these, right? I'm sure there's lots of ways that we can communicate to each other without needing to rely on something that's going to hurt somebody else. We're almost there. But thank you. We are going to be visited tomorrow by some MAGA protesters, right? With abortion clinic escort work, you don't want to engage with the MAGAs. You don't want to engage with them at all because the priority is getting people in and out safely without them being harassed by anybody. So by you engaging with them, you are putting danger and stress on your comrades who didn't consent to that. We are safe and we are strong because there's power in collective work, and that's exactly what we're doing here.
Quick point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronoun?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
And generally, try to be chill, right? Take a deep breath. And feel better before you say anything.
Thank you all so much for coming together and gathering today, because this is what organizing looks like.
That's right.
This is what building power looks like. This is what changing the country looks like.
That's what it's like to go to a lot of these Democrat meetings right now. And that means that you chase out normal people. And instead what you're doing is you're attracting the
most insane.
The craziest of the crazies are the only ones there. And it's a lesson that Republicans should learn too, because you want to make the whole point politically. You win politically when you grow your movement, right? That doesn't mean you compromise what you believe. It means you grow your movement. You bring more people in. People care about liberty and freedom. You reach out to communities that, and you do a good job reaching out. You get more people in. Usually that starts to result in different results in election, right? In elections. And so you win by absorbing and bringing in more people for recruiting them and converting them for liberty and freedom. And the other side's doing a great job now of chasing people out of their party, like I've never seen before. And the Democrats are usually, they have not historically been this crazy, not like this. And this personal obsession with weird, esoteric kind of views, encouraging, more drug addiction right downtown. I mean, just encouraging crime.
Let's give them the needles. Let's give them the drugs.
Right. Just encouraging absurd, ridiculous things. you eventually will run into a problem at the election level. You just will. And because you're too racist to accept the fact that people who you just presume by default out of arrogance that everybody who looks a certain way is going to vote for you, it dehumanizes those people.
Right.
And
They're
it's
just,
obnoxious.
They're just automaton cattle that's going to do what I want.
That's what they assume. And so because of that, you're driving a lot more people in. So I do think that Republicans are going to do well in Washington State. I think they can take back the state legislature in both houses this cycle. It's very likely. It's the most likely since 1994, certainly, that we've seen in a long time. And I think in many ways this is actually even more dramatic, the potential. Now, I never, want to overlook the fact that Republicans are exceptionally good at snatching defeat from the jaws of
I wanted to
victory.
talk about that.
Yeah,
So,
because that's something.
How red is this red wave?
Well, and I think it's going to be a lot redder than people think.
Okay.
Again, I mean, I think it's going to be much more dramatic than people realize. No matter what kind of special interests and money get thrown into the left, and there'll be a ton of it, right, that you'll see this cycle. They're very distracted by a lot of things. And there's also a highly motivated group of activists I'm seeing on our side. I've been doing these training classes around the state for activists just in general, freedom and liberty-oriented activists. And when I ask how many of you are brand new to this, you've never been involved before, last 12 months, it's 80% of the people. And
It's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's all these people suddenly are like, I want to get involved.
Right. That's
Yeah.
more than I saw at the Tea Party in 2009, right? That's more than I've seen in other waves in the past. It's a huge number of people. And when you talk to them, everybody's different. But a lot of them are highly skilled professional people that are getting involved and engaged, and they'll tell you, I never paid attention before until they trashed my kid's school, right?
Or they forced a mask on me.
Right,
Yeah.
or the mandate came down and I saw this, or Hunter Biden's laptop, or whatever the story is.
Yeah.
It's different for everybody. I've heard a lot of different reasons. But generally, you're bringing together now suddenly this influx of activists that they may not even go to Republican meetings, but they're out there working for liberty and freedom candidates, however they want to define that. And so I don't even think the Republican Party sees the volume and the significance of these people.
They're too busy fighting amongst themselves.
Well,
Yeah.
and you're always going to have that, right? And there's always a certain deficiency with political parties. The Republicans aren't exempt to this, just like the Democrats aren't, where you're going to have factions within a party that vies. There's always some of this tension. It exists. It's always existed. It existed from the founding of the country. It exists now. It'll exist 100 years from now. There's always going to be factions that fight in the party. Either you do a good job managing your own faction fights so that you're not creating a mass exodus out of your party, or you don't. The Democrats are not doing a good job right now, so there's a mass exodus occurring in the party. The Republicans, depends on which county you're in. Some counties are more organized than others. Some counties are more capable of managing people with different opinions together and still kind of work towards a common goal. And that ends up becoming a longer conversation about how you manage a local party to be effective.
And then just from my end, I'm a PCO in the Republican
and
Party.
I am too. I mean,
Yeah,
I
and-
am in Thurston County.
And I spend more time doing this than I do being a PCO.
Sure.
But the point is, I'm talking to other PCOs still too, and I'll just let you know.
Yeah.
In Snohomish County, I don't want to say anything specific because something recently just happened that was kind of wild.
Right.
There's a push of new PCOs, and they're pissed.
Right.
At the way that things have been run,
Right.
and stuff's starting to change inside the party here in Snohomish County.
And I think you'll see a lot of that. New motivated people is a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a healthy thing for any kind of political organization or movement. And it doesn't mean that everything's perfect and kumbaya and butterflies and sunshine and that the utopia's here tomorrow. I don't believe that. But I believe that the more engaged a base is, the more likely it is that you can do well in elections. I mean, the point of this segment, right, to talk about election cycle. And I think there's a substantial impact on having a legislative cycle where you have both legislators and senators where you can control both houses. And I'll explain, here's just an example of why that matters. So if you looked at this last election, because there's a lot of people that complain, myself included at times, where we say, gosh, that Republican candidate, what a wimpy, spineless guy, right?
Yeah.
They're in Olympia, and what the heck? I mean, I can hardly, he's so squishy. I
Can't even listen to him.
Right,
Yeah.
I can't even listen to him, right? But when you saw a lot of these really bad bills that came forward, the Republicans, to their credit, and they deserve credit when they earn it, is they did in lockstep vote against a lot of really bad bills. I mean, clearly those bills wouldn't have gone anywhere if they were in charge. They never would have gotten out of committee.
Right.
So there's a difference. That's number one. You get a lot of bad bills that die early. Now, that's playing defense. That means that at least playing defense, they would.
So we at least have defense.
You at least have defense, yeah. And that's true. A couple years ago when the Republicans, it was only a few years ago that Republicans controlled the majority on the Senate, and they killed hundreds of bad bills every cycle when that happened. In fact, during that cycle, no taxes were increased at all. While they were there. I mean, that's impressive.
For Washington State.
For Washington State, yeah. And so if you see, there is a difference. It does matter whether it's a Republican or Democrat, at least right now. It does seem to appear that way. So if you get a new wave of Republicans coming in under this kind of wave, and they're actually in a majority on both sides, from a defensive standpoint, probably a lot of bad things never see the light of day. So that's good. The question is, can they have a positive agenda that they can move forward?
I was going to say, okay, now you got Republican House and Senate.
Right.
With Theodore J. Inslee.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And so Inslee's going to be vetoing, presumably,
Everything.
a lot of good things that come through. So one of the questions is, well, how do you deal with the veto, right? You're probably, the Democrats will be more likely, because whatever's left is probably a pretty core, and they'll be playing defense themselves. So they'll probably not allow, you probably won't get enough of a majority to overturn a veto.
Of course.
Because you need a much larger majority. However, one of the options that exists for activists, and this is something to keep in mind, is if you run a citizens initiative to the legislature, there's two different types of initiatives you can run. You can run an initiative to the people, which is really hard because you collect all these signatures by July, and it's 400,000 or so that you need to get, and that's almost impossible to do. It's not impossible, but it's difficult.
It's tough.
If you do initiative legislature, you can collect signatures all the way till December. So you get a much...
Now this is different from the referendum.
Totally different than a referendum.
Okay, and the initiative to the legislature says, we want you guys to vote on this?
We want you to either vote on it and put it into law, or reject it and let it go on the ballot next November. Or there's a third option that's rarely used, which is you would reject it, but you're going to provide an alternative to go on the ballot in November.
So the second one, so you're saying for less signatures and more time.
No, same signatures,
but more time.
But more time. Yeah.
So more time.
Yep.
If they don't pass it, it still ends up on the ballot as an initiative.
Correct. Yeah, so
that's
way better. It is.
Yeah.
And now, historically, when more conservative folk, whether it's Tim Eyman or somebody else, runs an initiative to the legislature, we've never had a majority in the legislature that was Republican. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to put it into law, right? So the idea of it even being signed into law never really occurs to anybody.
They were just using it as a way to collect less signatures to get
it. Yeah, a lower cost way of getting it on the ballot in a year from now.
Yeah.
But because you are very likely right now to get a Republican House and Senate, now they're more inclined, if it's a good initiative, right, that they would agree with, they're more inclined to say, yeah, absolutely, I'll put it in the ballot, I'll sign it into law, right? Why not?
Yep.
It's a good idea, you know. The governor can't veto it.
Really?
Yeah, it's totally veto proof. Governor.
So in that case, the citizenry kind of acts as the executive check.
Correct.
Oh my.
So anything that gets proposed,
didn't know that.
Right?
Yeah.
Most people aren't paying attention to that. But it provides this outlet potential. Now, it's not easy. Getting 400,000 signatures, I'm sorry, anybody that thinks that's easy has not been around the block before, and you haven't dealt with the logistics. It's really, really a hard thing. And I'm not even a big fan of initiatives on average, but this exists out here, and if it wasn't for this massive wave of new activists and significant people who are doing a lot of interesting things, I'm not even sure that I would even consider it. But because there's so many now, and we're demonstrating, particularly on gun issues or parental control of education or tax repeal or public safety issues or things like that, that I think you're going to have pretty much universal appeal on, other than the insider Democrats, right? Everyone else wants
other than
these
the
things.
crazy leftists.
Yeah, the crazy leftists aren't going to want it, and the elites won't want it, but the regular people will. If some of those ideas are proposed and run well, it is not easy. I'm telling you, anybody hearing me right now who thinks, oh, I can just go do that. No, it's not that easy. But if it's done well and thought through, and you stay focused on what you're trying to achieve, it's very achievable that you can, maybe this cycle or even the following cycle, when you would guarantee to have Republicans in control. This is presuming this red wave's real and it hits as much as we want. Those who care about freedom and liberty, we would probably want a red wave, and we want these people in office. If they're there, now you're giving them something to sign to office that Inslee can't veto.
That is huge.
It's a huge
that's
deal.
so huge. We could, if we get both houses, we can get around Inslee.
Yeah, that'd be a way to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that you can change emergency powers, right? You could put term limits on the governor. I mean, there's all
Those
kinds of
are the first
things.
two things that need to happen, right?
You can have all kinds of things. Now, listen, it's hard. I don't think anybody that ever says it's easy is wrong. But and you can do this without a lot of money if you have a volunteer active base, right? People who are willing to go out
Which we
and do
might
this.
have now
We
because
might.
there's so much interest.
We might, yeah. And I mean, if you can avoid the infighting, right, and the drama that inevitably comes up, or if you're willing to have everybody get credit for it, right? If you're willing to not get in your own way, then there's a
This
reason.
is my idea, and everyone has to thank me.
Right,
for,
or
yeah.
whatever, you
Yeah.
know, just the human nature part of this process. But if you're able to do that in kind of a logical way, I would not be surprised if there's a bunch of good ideas that can come out this cycle. And if it works, and then Inslee's angry, of course, because he can't repeal it and it becomes law. Now you could do another wave next year that when you know now you have Republicans in charge who are willing to do things.
Just go crazy. Okay, here's
Yeah.
the 10 things I want you to sign.
Here's the things that Inslee
Yeah.
vetoed.
Yeah.
You know, the people will overrule his veto. You know,
I want to see
It's
Inslee
possible.
get angry on camera. That guy, I mean, I know he's a total narcissist megalomaniac, but he
Right.
doesn't have any charisma.
No.
Like nothing. It's so weird to watch him. And if he didn't get his way,
yeah.
I want to see what a speech would be like if he didn't get his way.
Yeah, and
That
I
would
mean,
be very weird.
he's done that a few times in the past where he's been angry, and you can see it's he's got a weird speaking style, and
Yeah.
and it's strange, but you know. For those of us who are going to be focused, right, we care about freedom and liberty. Let's find some ways to advance that forward. And Washington State is right there on the cusp of this ability to go the wrong way or the right way. You know, and I say that, you know, you can go into the utopian leftist sort of schemes that Seattle's demonstrating to us what that's going to be like, or you have the opportunity to go back to a much more freedom-oriented environment, which I believe the majority of people who live in Washington really want that.
Right.
Whatever.
But can we get our act together to
Yes, and can you
to
keep,
achieve it?
Yeah, can you keep from infighting, you know, to get there or something like that? So that's kind of one of the things overall I'm looking at. I mean, you're going to see a lot of federal money come into this cycle in Washington from the Republican conservative leaning side. You know, they're going to throw a lot of money into Washington. It's not always money well spent. People who come from out of state to spend money here oftentimes don't know the landscape very well to spend the money well. I've seen this many times, and that's probably going to be true this time as well. But the only reason they're doing that is because they can see some of the same survey data that the rest of us are seeing, and they got a sense that we know the 8th Congressional District, which is where you have was Dr. Schreier, right? She's there currently as the Democrat. That's going to inspire a bunch of money to come in here because that's likely a seat that's going to flip Republican. It's it's Democrat now, maybe go Republican. There's actually a couple more vulnerable seats. The 6th Congressional District at the congressional level, which is the peninsula, is also vulnerable. And the 10th Congressional District, which includes Olympia and kind of South Pierce County, that one's actually vulnerable too if you have the right candidates who can run the right campaigns. That's a big if.
That's the big question.
Correct. But the 8th is almost certainly going to flip, and then these other two are potentials that sit out there. You also have the fact that statewide you have the Secretary of State because Hobbs
I wanted
was
to talk about that one. Yeah.
And that overlaps with the Senate race for Patty Murray. And the Republicans, for the first time in probably many, many years, have, with Tiffany Smiley, who's running against Patty Murray, a pretty legitimate candidate who's coming out with a great story and who's hitting the ground running. She's filed early, started last year early, raised a ton of money, and is causing the national groups to rank Patty Murray's likelihood of being reelected lower and lower as they look at it closer, which that means you're doing a decent job running a campaign and providing a viable alternative. For those that want to just jump into office running for these positions because, I don't know, Jesus told you to run or whatever your story is, I'm sorry, you're probably not going to win that way. I mean, people can. We saw that truck driver win out in New Jersey, right? But that inspires a bunch of people who aren't going to lay the foundation very well for their campaign. They're going to try to jump in at the last minute.
Just because he got lucky.
Yeah, just because he got lucky.
Doesn't mean you're going to win the lottery, too. Yeah.
No, the other 3,000 or 4,000 people that tried to do the same thing lost. So you have the ability to potentially have a lot of surprise outcomes, I think, in this cycle, but you still want to shift the potential for success in your direction by usually get involved early, knowing how to raise money, having an organized group, presenting yourself well. Don't presume everybody else is going to do it for you, right? I mean, there's a lot of things about how to run a campaign successfully. She's doing a really good job. Smiley's doing an amazing job prepping for this race, and it's better than I've ever seen a Republican, at least in the last, almost 20 years, prepare for that type of a race. And Patty Murray's vulnerable, and she's obnoxious, and she's been there forever. And so these things are all combining to create an unusual year in Washington state elections.
Let's talk about the Secretary of State a little bit more.
Sure.
Because that's a really key position.
It is.
And so we had Kim Wyman, who was
statewide elected,
and I'm not a fan of.
Sure, and a lot of people, particularly after the way she left, right?
Yeah, she joined Team Biden.
She joined Team Biden
after creating the mail-in voter disaster of the state.
Well,
right?
to be fair, the mail-in voter started before she became Secretary of State. So she became Secretary of State in 2012. The legislature made the final death knell to in-person voting in Pierce County in 2011.
Okay.
So before she ever got in, that had already happened. But she
lorded over it
she
for
was
10
there,
years.
and she promoted it, and she sold it.
And she said it was great. It's absolutely secure, and everything's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so now you're in this situation where she particularly left a bad taste in people's mouth the way she went to, where it was done in a way to sabotage the Republicans' ability to retain that seat in every way possible, right? By not recruiting a replacement, by not training somebody up over the last 12 years.
She's like, I'm out, see ya.
Right, she just bailed immediately, threw everybody under the bus, attacked Republicans on her way out the door, and joined Team Biden. So that's not going to be the way that you inspire anybody to think that you are a good person on the Republican side. And I've known her since she was auditor in Thurston County. I considered her a friend back then. I did stuff with her periodically, but it is what it is. And she had there are things to learn from how she ran her campaigns, by the way. There is some value there. But now the governor decided to appoint Hobbs. He was going to appoint a Democrat.
Who was a Democrat senator.
A Democrat senator, yep. And so Steve Hobbs is in there now. And because he's been appointed, now he has to defend that seat.
It's a special election.
It's a special election for him, but it's a statewide race. So just like the federal Senate race, those are the two statewide races you're going to see on the ballot. So so now he's going to be running to retain his appointment, and then he has to run again in 2024. So he has two election cycles right back to back. Those are 4-year terms, but that's what he'll have to do. Yeah. And so there's a number of Republicans that have jumped in to run against him so far, and a lot of people have looked at his race and they say, okay, it was very obvious that Inslee, who is not a fan of Hobbs, he appointed Hobbs to get him out of the Senate because Hobbs has one of the unusual distinctions of being like one of the last Democrats who actually believes that math is real.
He's a conservative Democrat.
Yeah, quote unquote. Yeah. But he on the math side, I mean, he just was too intelligent to believe that math doesn't exist anymore. That's not true. Most Democrats have denied math now for a long time in Olympia. So they're willing, there's no tax too big, right? They believe they can do whatever they want.
2 plus 2 equals 27 million.
Whatever it means. Yeah. So, and he was one of the few voices left in the state Senate on the Democrat side who was willing to rein in kind of this absurd approach to bloating government. And so because of that, he could think for himself. That's always a danger on the Democrat side. And so that put him at odds with the Democrat leadership and Inslee in particular because he'd killed a number of bills that Inslee had tried to push. So getting him out and putting him in the Secretary of State's office was a pretty intelligent political move, Machiavellian move in a way. And the only question is whether the Democrats are going to decide to run like a crazy leftist, this time.
For Secretary of State or for his old position. Okay.
Yeah. No, they'll definitely run him for his old position. It's been appointed. That one's been appointed too. That race is up in the air right now too. That Senate seat is one of the ones that's also vulnerable to Republican taking over, Republican taking control in that particular seat. But when you see this Secretary of State race, it's going to be Hobbs, who's moderately more normal than most of the Democrats are usually running for that seat, and reasonably intelligent, but again, not politically on the inside. So a lot of Democrats don't like him as much. The progressives don't like him. You have an independent who's Julie Anderson, who jumped in out of Pierce County. She's the auditor there now, and she's always been a Democrat, but she's been a more conservative Democrat. So she's jumped in as an independent, which I think probably means you get just destroyed in the primary, but it is what it is.
That's what happened last year.
Right, yeah. And then that
last election.
Last election cycle, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so with Washington State's top 2 primary, it tends to squeeze out all third-party people. So then you have the inevitability of a number of different Republicans that have jumped in the race, right? And so most prominent among those is probably Senator Wagner out of the 39th, and he's going to be pretty well known. There'll be some others that jump into. I would like to see the only way we're going to have reasonable reform within the Secretary of State's office probably is if we have a Republican in there. And it doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean that we're going to get everything you want, but at least we could have the possibility of shifting that office in the right direction and a priority of transparency in elections that I think would exist. And so we'll just have to see how it goes. But the interesting thing is that I think that Secretary of State's race is linked very closely with this federal the federal race for Senate as well, for the federal Senate seat with Patty Murray and Smiley's race. And so where national money comes into Washington State, it's going to be focused on that Senate seat and on this congressional race. And some of that's going to flow into some of the election results locally in some of these other swing districts as well. And it's hard to predict right now, but it's certainly moving in the direction that I think that the liberty and freedom side, which only has a home in the Republican Party right now, there's a chance that they're going to do better. So, but it still takes, nobody should take that for granted. Honestly, I feel like sometimes the establishment's taking this for granted a little bit more than they should. This still requires a lot of work, a lot of help, candidates that don't need a drool cup to run for office, but I mean, people who are seriously capable, know what they're doing, and willing to work hard and take it seriously. So
awesome.
We'll see how it goes.
Well, and that leads us to our next topic, which is local activism. But
yeah,
I think we should take a break.
Yeah, let's do that in the next segment
before we get into that. So
you bet.
Awesome. This has been Glen Morgan with We the Governed, WeDidTheGovern.com, and this has been Glen Morgan. This has been Dylan Moore with iRead TV at iRead.tv, and we'll catch you on the next one.